Welcome to the Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski of Condo Vulture. Tuning in this podcast, you're going to hear a conversation by current and former journalists talking about some of the big stories that have occurred in the South Florida area in the recent weeks. What are we talking about this week? We're talking about housing. Is it actually stuck, and will it be stuck till 2020? That's what economists from Bank of America is saying. We're also going to talk about an attorney just got arrested for allegedly helping someone steal a house. We'll get into a story about Windwood, that area with all the murals. Somebody wants to put up a 48-story tower under new legislation called the Live Local Act, so we will get to that. Another story we're going to be looking at is the Waldorf Astoria. Just got a loan, construction loan, to put a hotel and a condo complex up. How much is the loan for? $668 million. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with another story about condo associations and arrests. Two board members kind of got into it. One board member was allegedly stalking the other board member, and lo and behold, there was an arrest. So we're going to go to Mr. Fackler. He'll give us some interpretation of what it all means. So the other side of the break, we will get into our podcast.
Welcome to the CondoVultures.com podcast with your host, Peter Zalewski, a Miami real estate broker, Wall Street consultant, and expert witness. This podcast is focused on identifying real estate buying opportunities in the South Florida condo market in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. The CondoVultures.com podcast is not authorized by the South Florida real estate industry and will most likely annoy many of the region's talking heads. This podcast will feature straight talk and salty language that could be offensive to some. Please remember that past investment success does not determine future gains, especially in South Florida's volatile condo market. For more information, please visit CondoVultures.com. Don't buy a South Florida condo, discounted or distressed, before taking a Condo Vultures correction tour. CondoVultures.com offers weekly bus and walking tours that focus on educating buyers on the how-tos of identifying discounted condos, analyzing the opportunities, and purchasing units. Every tour attendee receives a list of all condo projects in a particular market, a market assessment handout, and unmatched expert analysis. For more information on the condo correction tours, please visit CondoVultures.eventbrite.com.
It's a simple formula, and it works. Buy low, sell high. We're Condo Vultures, and when it comes to your real estate, we help you buy low. At Condo Vultures, we represent the buyer, and now's the time to buy. Log on to CondoVultures.com for more information. CondoVultures.com. And remember, before you sell high, you have to buy low. Featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, and Time Magazine. Condo Vultures Realty, a licensed Florida real estate brokerage capitalizing on the condo correction since 2006.
Welcome to the Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski from Condo Vultures. If you're tuning in this podcast, you're going to hear a conversation by current and former journalists talking about some of the big stories that have occurred within the last few weeks or so. We have 6 stories we're going to discuss. There's 3 other journalists on the panel with me. I handpicked the stories. I sent them off to the journalists, and we're going to ask them to sort of give us some straight talk. The purpose and the objective of the podcast is to cut through the fluff, cut through the hyperbole, and give you, the audience, an idea of what's really going on in the South Florida economy as well as the real estate market. So let me jump into it and introduce you to the members of the podcast this week. We have a gentleman who was a journalist for over 25 years. Right now, he has his own public relations marketing firm. No one else but John Gruss. Check out his website, GrussPR.com, GRUSSPR.com. And you can get a hold of John on X at John Gruss, JEANGRUSS. Mr. Gruss, how's it going? Happy summer.
Hey, likewise. How's it going, Peter?
Everything is great. I came to the office today. I was expecting the torrential downpour, and it was nice and sunny. What do you make of this weather?
Well, it's Florida weather, and it's what's really nice now is that a lot of the people have left town, and we got our town back to ourselves. So no more standing in line for everything. So I love the summer here.
I love the summer as well. Who else do we have on the podcast this week? We have a gentleman, a journalist for over 20 years, wrote about white-collar crime. Right now, he does public relations and marketing. He also set up a newsletter and a podcast focused on New York Jets. New York Jets is a NFL football team out of New York, obviously. This gentleman lives in Miami, so he set it up in Miami area. But there's no one else but John Fackler. The name of his newsletter and podcast is called Jet Up Miami, JETUPMIAMI. And you can find it on Substack. If you want to get a hold of Mr. Fackler, John Fackler, you get him at JT Fackler on X, JTFAKLER. Mr. Fackler, you seem to be in a really good mood today. Something go wrong with the Jets?
No, everything's fine.
Oh, interesting. And how's it going with the newsletter? How's it going with the podcast?
Well, it's going well. I'm still learning as I go. But I'm actually starting to fire up the local, which was the actual plan of this. Fire everybody up. I'm already firing them up with this podcast, so I might as well do another one.
Well, it's something about you, Mr. Factor. You have that ability. So kudos to you. That is a superpower. Who else we have on the podcast this week? We have a gentleman. He's been a journalist for 25 years. He basically is pumping out the stories unbelievably. He's also an author, written a number of different books. No one else but Brian Bandell of the South Florida Business Journal. If you want to reach out to Brian, you can get him at Brian Bandell, BrianBandell. What's going on, Mr. Bandell?
Hey, I'm good. I'm enjoying the Florida Panthers victory at the Stanley Cup playoffs. That was awesome. Saw them partying at Elbow Room. So,
Nice.
Yeah. But Broward is the center of sports now. We're taking it from Miami.
It is the center of sports. So Brian, did you make it out to any Panthers games this year? Were you fortunate enough? I know the ticket price got kind of high after last year's Stanley Cup run, where they made it to the Cup Series, but ultimately they failed against Las Vegas. Were you able to go to any games this year, or any playoff games even?
No, I couldn't make the playoff games. I wanted to, but it didn't work out, unfortunately. But I watched all of them. So,
But Brian, another quick question. You're a Miami Dolphins fan, aren't you?
yeah, I'm a Dolphin fan. That's correct.
Yeah. Do you happen to sign up for Mr. Fackler's Jet Up Miami, which is on Substack, where he puts out a newsletter? He does evaluations of all the AFC East teams, including the Miami Dolphins, and he gives straight talk. And according to him, he's actually a meatball Jets fan. Any take on that, Brian?
I mean, I only think about the Jets twice a year, and those are the two times the Dolphins beat them a year. So, besides that, I don't really need to think about the Jets.
There's a dagger to the heart.
Dagger to the heart. That's a perfect way to go ahead and get to the next phase of the podcast. Let me go ahead and lay out some rules of engagement before we go ahead and get into our stories. As mentioned, we're going to do 6 stories. I handpick them, send them off to the journalist, and then we're going to discuss them. But some of the housekeeping type of stuff. Point number 1, if you have questions for us, if you want, you like what we're saying, you dislike what we're saying, you want to comment, make suggestions, get us on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get us at Miami RRP, which stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. Not AARP, but Miami RRP. And then in terms of sponsorship for the podcast, it is my firm, CondoVultures.com. We put out statistics on condos and anything and everything related to sort of the condos. If you're in the condo market, you're looking for some sort of interpretation, check out the website, CondoVultures.com. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into our podcast. Let's start off with John Bruce with story number 1. John, this piece, I'm going to read you the headline. I'm going to read you the first couple graphs, and I want you to comments. Coming out of CNBC, and here's the headline. Housing market to remain stuck. And I'm doing air quotes if you're listening to it an audio only. Housing market to remain stuck until at least 2026, Bank of America says. And here's the first couple graphs, Sean, then I want you to comment. The housing market is unlikely to recover for several years, and affordability won't get any better unless a recession, according to Bank of America economists. In a mostly pessimistic outlook on the sector, the bank sees a variety lining up against both a major improvement to sale and a drop in prices that would bring younger buyers back into the market. Among them are pandemic-related factors that saw a rush of buyers come into the market around 2020, 2021, driving a dramatic spike in sales and coinciding with an inflation burst that goosed interest rates to their highest levels since the turn of the 21st century. Sales have largely been on a downward trend since, outside of a spike earlier this year amid unrealized hopes that the Federal Reserve would be cutting interest rates aggressively. And here is a quote from an economist called Michael Gapin, and he's one of the ones who authored the report. And here's his quote. The U.S. housing market is stuck, and we are not convinced it will become unstuck anytime soon. After a surge in housing activity during the pandemic, it has since retreated and stabilized. It's a group of economists being cautiously optimistic. They're known for not necessarily taking an opinion, always kind of going right down the middle. Or is this, would you put any credibility that maybe this economist has given a sign that, the housing market might have some problems ahead? What say you, Mr. Gross?
Well, I mean, we have discussed many of these issues over this podcast over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, they're all the issues that are familiar to us, which was, ultra low interest rates, which basically have locked in significant proportion of homeowners who now cannot move. And quite honestly, prices have gotten to the point where very few people can afford a home now, especially first-time home buyers. So basically, the market's frozen, and we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, and I think they're right. I think a recession is the only is really one of the few things that is going to sort of break the logjam. And I guess it depends on where you think we are in the cycle right now. I mean, are we near the end of the peak cycle, or are we still in the middle innings? And so I think it's anyone's guess.
Mr. Chris, my question is, this economist who's quoted here, as well as the other economists who are involved with putting together this report, is that likely to influence the lending outlook for an institution like Bank of America? Now, granted, this is on the investment banking side, but could you see it coincide with this report comes out and lo and behold, B of A and maybe other lenders are a little bit more hesitant to put money on the street?
Well, they're hesitant to put money on the street because the government has basically told them to be hesitant. They've come down pretty hard on a lot of lenders with their real estate portfolios, and underwriting is now a lot tougher. And of course, Federal Reserve jacked up short-term interest rates, which drove up long-term interest rates. And I guess it's the bank economists certainly weigh in on the bank's operations, but I don't think it's the tail that wags the dog. You know what I'm saying? So I think the banks are much more concerned with what the Federal Reserve is doing and what the regulators are doing than what their own economists are predicting.
And Brian, you want to follow up on that? I mean, economists are known for being cautiously optimistic. That's what they always, whenever you ask them one a question, even if you're having a couple of drinks with them, they're always cautiously optimistic. So is this report simply coming, is it reflecting what everybody already knows, or is it maybe shedding some light on market conditions that maybe people weren't expecting or anticipating?
Well, I think there are some things the report should mention that they didn't mention. The law of supply and demand. There's more demand for housing than there is supply right now because there's growth in the population. There's younger people, millennials, who want to buy a house, and there's not enough houses being built to meet that demand right now. And the high interest rates and the high construction costs are slowing down home building in much of the country, because it costs more to build the home. And the interest rates are making it harder for them to sell the home at good prices. So because of that there's kind of built up demand for houses. Now, the challenge is the price. A lot of people want to buy a house, but the price of the houses that are available are just not there right now. If interest rates were to come down, or they could have a lower cost of construction, then that would help boost up home sales. You also see developers like Lennar trying to come up with more innovative products. Like you start to see them in Texas do more kind of manufacturer type housing, prefab construction that's simpler and cheaper, smaller houses, like smaller single family homes, things like that, because they're seeing the price point of the customer and they're trying to build to meet that price point. So there's demand. A lot of the demand isn't necessarily at the price point that sellers want. And a lot of sellers are, unless they're forced by a family emergency or a new job to sell, they don't want to sell. So that, in fact, I think half of the home sales I write about, like in Miami Beach or Palm Beach, are the estate of someone who died. The owners don't want to sell, not the living one. No.
Not the living one. Brian, we're going to go to you with story number 2. This story you wrote appeared in the South Florida Business Journal. I'm going to read you the headline for a couple graphs. Then maybe share some insight with us. You might not feel comfortable commenting because you're probably going to be writing stories about it in the future. Any insight you can have, and then we'll kick it around with the other members of the panel. So here we go. Again, coming out of South Florida Business Journal. The last Sears, South Florida could be redeveloped through the Live Local Act. Anybody who doesn't know what Sears is, and by the way, it's a retailer that started off with a catalog company. They would send out catalogs, people living out in the rural areas, They fill in a form, they submit it, and lo and behold, they got their stuff delivered. Think about it, the predecessor to Amazon, but taking a hell of a lot longer. And then what is Live Local Act? And Brian, I'll let you get into that, but basically it's a state law to encourage workforce type of housing, more reasonably priced housing, where if a developer builds a certain percentage that can be, attained by local, then they have the ability to go higher and bigger than they would have otherwise. That's kind of the overview. Now let's get into Brian's story. A Sears store in Miami, the last of the former retail powerhouse locations in South Florida, could be redeveloped into multifamily housing through the state's Live Local Act. The city Urban Development Review Board will consider plans for the 8.1 acre site at 3355 Southwest 22nd Street, which is also known as Coral Way, owned by the Sunny Isles Beach-based RK Associates, led by retail investor and Miami Heat minority owner Ron Katz. The property currently has 192,500 square feet of retail space, building that was completed in 1954. It currently houses a Sears store after the Illinois-based retail closed its Palm Beach Garden store in May. That's the last location of the Tri-County area. Brian, the story goes on to talk about Live Local Act, things like that. Why don't you kind of give us an overview about what's going on? If you're trying to picture where this location is, it's effectively right on the border between Miami and Coral Gables on a street, which is 37th Avenue Southwest, and or known as Douglas. So, Brian, the floor is yours. What can you tell us?
Well, so it's sort of like if you're leaving Brickell and you're headed west to Coral Gables, this is often where people pass through the Coral Way area. So under Live Local, throughout Florida, you can build residential up to the maximum density allowed in your municipality, up to the maximum height within a 1 mile radius, as long as 40% of that is workforce housing. Workforce housing means 20% above the area median income. So for Miami-Dade County, that's like almost $100,000. What you can target here. And that means you can get approval without rezoning it, without getting city commission approval and all that. So on this particular site, we're talking about 1,050 multifamily units in 8 stories, plus about 44,000 square feet of ground floor retail, which is a lot more than could be approved right now. Right now, it would be basically about half that would be allowed. So we're talking about a lot of density in an area that has a lot of traffic going back and forth between Brickell and Coral Gables. So yes, it's going to create traffic, but on the other hand, it will create 40% of those units, about 400 units, will be workforce housing, which would otherwise not be built there. You've probably noticed most of the new apartments built in Miami Coral Gables are upper end apartments, way above median income type apartments. So in exchange for allowing 400 units of workforce housing, you're also going to get more density on the site, more height on the site as well.
And Brian, these are condos and rentals, or just rentals, or any kind of clarification?
It doesn't say. Right now, it's owned by RK Associates, Renan Katz. Renan Katz, a part owner of the Miami Heat. He's mostly a retail guy. My guess is he's going to flip this to an apartment guy. You could use the very same example in Fort Lauderdale. Remember Sears Town in Fort Lauderdale? The old Sears? He owned that. And then he ended up flipping that to a national apartment developer. And now that's being developed as apartments. So after he rezoned it. So that my guess is the same thing here. He's getting attention. I've already gotten calls confidentially from residential developers asking me questions about this. So the residential developers are looking at this and seeing how it goes. And I'm guessing he's going to try and sell it, once he gets all the entitlements and all that, obviously make a good chunk of change. The Live Local Act made a good amount of money for a lot of landowners here.
That's for sure. Mr. Fackler, you frequent Sears. You've been there. You've been going there for a number of years. You recently had an episode in there. Could you give us a lay of the land for what Sears Roebuck is and was? Maybe for somebody who's listening to this podcast or watching the podcast doesn't have a clue. Maybe they recognize the name, the Sears Tower, or where the Miami Performing Arts Center is. They were one of the architectural aspects of that was a former Sears location. But can you give the audience a perspective about Sears and what it means to you?
Well, Sears to me means a lower to working class to middle class destination for shopping. I mean, that's the demographic. There's no high-end demographic associated with Sears. You know, and I'm not trying to be insulting, but that's just the way it's, you know, where it's built itself. Sears has gone through some issues. They've restructured over the years, so they're really having a hard time overall trying to compete, you know, with everybody else.
Yeah, and Mr. Factor, am I correct in that Sears had a bunch of they kind of differentiated themselves because they sold a lot of tools.
Right.
People would go there for tools, and they also did auto repair. You know, they change your oil, they change your tires. They would do a whole variety of things, kind of like what Costco does right now. Is that
Exactly.
a
I was
fair comparison?
thinking about that. Yeah, I was thinking about that as a great analogy because they kind of led the way here as far as, you know, this movement to have you know, automotive sections in the store, in the warehouse. So in a way, they were they started this whole movement as a way, you know, to combine everything, so to speak.
And then, Mr. Factor, last question before we go on to the next story. What was interesting about where Sears is located in Miami, but on the other side is Coral Gables, and right there was a Denny's. And so I don't know how long that Denny's has been there, but this Sears has been there since the 50s. So if you want to get a moment in time experience, you can go shopping at Sears, you can cross the street, and it's not high density. It's all set back with parking lots, stuff like that. You cross the street, and then you go into something like 1940s, 1950s, 1960s Denny's. Right or wrong, Mr. Fackler? Is that a way to sort of time travel?
Agree. I've actually been to that Denny's several times, and I would definitely agree with that thesis.
Interesting. We'll go on with story number 3. We're going to go to you with story number 3, John Fackler. I'll read you the headline and read you the first couple graphs, and I want you to comment. Coming out of local10.com, which is the ABC affiliate down here in Miami, WPLG. So here we go with the headline, Mr. Fackler. South Florida attorney accused of helping woman steal home. First couple graphs, and the dateline is Cooper City, which is a suburb in Broward County. It's just west of Fort Lauderdale. Here we go, Mr. Fackler. A South Florida lawyer is facing 3 felony charges after authorities accused her of using her position to help a Cooper City woman steal her son's steak in a home. Authorities arrested Ashley Ruth Morin, 28, of Cooper City on Monday. According to Broward County jail records, story goes on to say that according to a probable cause affidavit, the Broward Sheriff's Office investigation into Morin began after the Broward County Property Appraiser's Office received a complaint that Suzanne Corcoran, who also has been charged in the case, filed a forged quitclaim deed in her son's name, and this is in quotes, which removed his interest from the property, end quote, which they had owned jointly. BSO Detective Robert Feet, working as part of a detachment with the BCPA, wrote in the affidavit that Morin once worked for Corcoran's son as an attorney. So just sounds like a situation where a mother's trying to allegedly swindle her son out of his stake in a home. Why don't you tell us what else the story goes on to say?
Apparently, there's a long feud going on between the son and the mother. That's apparent, and that was actually confirmed by the mother's attorney, who by the name was Saul. So better call Saul for situations like this. But yeah, it's there's a lot of murky stuff behind the scenes here. What people don't realize is that the son is the commissioner for Cooper City. He's the Cooper City commissioner. So the wonder is there any kind of political issues or shenanigans going on here? Everybody actually is from Cooper City, including this young attorney. What exactly is the connection here to Cooper City for those who are curious about the political ramifications or shenanigans that go on naturally? So yeah, it's a, you know, the thing about it is interesting is that this was not a thing until like 2008, which I believe was the foreclosure crisis around the time of that, where the FBI issued a warning that there was this latest scam called identity fraud. So it might have been there, but it really wasn't a thing until the foreclosure. You heard a lot about this, you know, these deeds that were filed, they were they're basically forgeries. And now Brian has his boots on the ground, so he knows more about the actual history of these stories currently. Is he seeing? I'm curious if he's seeing more of these now than before. Why? And is there an increase? Because I really haven't seen many stories in the press about this. So
I've seen some story. I've seen a couple of stories about rings of people that were arrested for doing deed fraud. Often it's people who are out of town. They case a house and they realize that someone is maybe someone's a snowbird or something.
Right.
And they kind of maybe steal their mail and file a deed. But I will say this: if you're a property owner in Broward County, the property appraiser has a program where you can register to avoid deed fraud. What happens? They'll email you or text you if the deed changes on your property. So you can know immediately if someone does something with your deed and you're like, wait, I didn't sell my house. So I think, and so if you're in your county, check with your property appraiser and see if they have that deed alert program to make sure someone doesn't do that to you. Because a lot of times they're looking for houses that look abandoned to try and do this to, and then they'll, kind of sneak themselves in there and be a squatter.
Yeah. There was actually a link in the story to take you to this sort of FAQ about what you can do to protect yourself. But I'm curious if that's also going on in Dade. Maybe it's just Broward. Broward's more advanced.
I think it could happen anywhere in Florida, really. I've heard it happen in Tampa and Orlando. They'll try and exploit it wherever they can.
And just to clarify for the audience, effectively, if somebody rolls into the clerk of the court's office, this is where the records are held. This is where you go. You submit something, you pay a fee. They give it a timestamp. It gets uploaded into the computer. So effectively, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, someone walks in, they have what's called a quick claim deed, which is like the simplest form. It doesn't necessarily have like a lot of recourse if it goes wrong. People will simply go in there, they'll pay a minimum fee, they'll record it, and lo and behold, they'll claim it as their own. And then they can turn around, try to sell it. They can turn around and try to lease out the place, or they can even turn around and try to get financing for it. Am I getting that right, guys?
Yes, exactly. In this case, they also forged the signature of the son. So, I took it to a whole new level.
And what about the effect of using an attorney? I've always heard if you get an attorney involved, you as somebody who doesn't have a law license, I'm not going to say you're protected, but generally speaking, my attorney told me. Any credibility there? Anybody have an opinion on that? Allegedly.
Well, I could say I'm very curious, the motivation for this very young lawyer, this woman, she's 28 or so. What is the motivation to essentially ruin your career? You're going to get disbarred. What?
Obviously, if convicted and if it all goes forward, yeah.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Jean Gross, we're going to go to you with story number 4. This piece coming out of the Miami Herald. I'll read you the headline. I'll read you the first couple graphs. And before I get into it, let me sort of just give everybody an idea of what's going on. So there was an industrial part of Miami back in the day before Doral was built out, before Out West was built out. So they used to manufacture bread. They did apparel in this area. It was just north of downtown Miami. It wasn't too far from where the Flagler train track carriage storage area was. So kind of an industrial type of part. The county at one point tried to bring a free trade zone, foreign trade zone here. County funded a foreign trade zone, built a facility. Lo and behold, it went sideways, never worked. Some investors came in after the fact, especially during the Great Recession. They bought a bunch of dirt. They allowed and encouraged artists to go ahead and paint murals, which some would call graffiti, on the walls. And like New York Press wrote about it, International Press wrote about it. Now it's like the most popular place. But basically, it's an old industrial area surrounded by a Dominican community, as well as a Puerto Rican community. There was Little San Juan to the north, and to the west is Little Santo Domingo. So that's kind of giving you the lay of the land. So that's the background. Let's get into the story, Mr. Groos. Headline: The End of Windwood. And Windwood is this industrial area that now has all the murals. The End of Windwood. Massive project would remake Miami's neighborhood. And here we go with the first couple of graphs, Mr. Groos. Miami's Windwood may be the hottest, hippest neighborhood in America's hottest city. A dynamic urban fusion of repurposed industrial buildings and warehouses interspersed with new low-rise buildings housing shops, bars, and restaurants, offices, and apartments, all of it steeped in artful design and curated graffiti murals. Its success is no accident. The reinvigorated Windwood, once a derelict industrial zone, is the deliberate result of a unique planning guidelines and development limits painstakingly laid out a decade ago by district property owners and the city of Miami's planner. The special Windwood regulations are backed by a distinct vision for a dense human-scale alternative to the new high-rise forests of Brickell and Edgewater. But just as they begin to bear fruit, the carefully laid out plans for Windwood are threatened by a controversial new state law, the Live Local Act, which overrides local building controls and encourages developers to supersize projects in exchange for setting aside apartment for affordable housing. In Windwood, Live Local Act looms in the form of a developer's plan to build a 48-story, which is 36 stories taller than what was normally allowed, which is 12. So normally it's 12 stories. This guy wants to go 48 stories in Windwood, atop a massive parking garage that by in itself was larger than much of the new construction in the neighborhood. So Mr. Gruss, the story's got a couple different aspects to it. One aspect is Live Local Act, high density. Instead of going 12, we're going to go 48 stories. The other part is Windwood. Is Windwood really, is it a destination, or is it a mirage and a waste created by Slick Miami marketing? Because there's no beach, there's no sand, and all of these murals change regularly, and the community gets fight, and none of them are historically protected. So what say you, Mr. Gruss? Is this about density, or is this about a hustle? Everybody's hot right now. Let's try to pump out as much as we can. If the market goes sideways, oh well.
Well, I mean, Windwood is the perfect place for this kind of thing. It's always been sort of, kind of the Wild West in there. It was an industrial, gritty warehouse district. And now they have a design review board. I mean, it seems a little bit like, oh yeah, give me a break. I mean, I think Windwood is actually the perfect place for this kind of new kind of development, because Windwood has always been changing. It went from being this gritty warehouse district to being sort of it had cheap real estate for artists. The artists moved in because it was cheap real estate and they could do their thing. And then people decided that was cool. So then restaurants and shops moved in, and fancy office space moved in. And, so it's ever changing. Actually, kind of like one of the people in the story, their quote was, "It's now called Edgewater West." Because I mean, really, Edgewater is sort of creeping in, and it's gentrification. This is not a unique phenomenon. This has happened in places like Tampa, where I was a reporter at the Tampa Tribune. We had a warehouse district around the port in Tampa, right near downtown. It was gritty, industrial. It had homeless encampments. And now the warehouse district in downtown Tampa is hip and cool. Got these amazing condo lofts. I mean, it's this is not unique to Miami. Windwood is not a unique destination. There are other places in the state that have gone through similar changes, and to sort of try to control all these kinds of with regulations and design review boards, it's gonna make it impossible to develop anything there. So I actually think Windwood is like the perfect place for this sort of experimentation, so to speak. Let's see what happens. I mean, this may be the solution that we're looking for affordable housing.
Well, Mr. Gruss, just to follow up with that, so there's no public transportation in and around there other than a trolley that runs sporadically. You're hemmed in by Interstate 95 near west. To the east, you basically have the Brightline tracks, and you have Miami Avenue. To go west is very difficult in and around that general vicinity. There's no grocery stores. I mean, I guess there's shopping now, but most of the shopping is kind of pricey. It's not exactly your bodega type, if you will. We're talking about more in the Whole Food type of pricing. So, does this have staying power, Mr. Gruss, or is this simply a byproduct of the fact that everybody came to Florida during the pandemic because we were an open state with masks? It became very popular, but is it ultimately going to hold going forward, or is this just a fad?
Yeah, but I mean, developers are willing to put down vast sums of money to bet that it's going to work. So, I mean, they're willing to take the risk that it's going to work. I mean, is it lacking some of the infrastructure? Sure. I mean, that's sort of part of the whole redevelopment of what used to be a warehouse district. I mean, the warehouse district didn't have shops and restaurants and public transportation and all those things. And so, I think as an evolution, those things eventually will make their way in there.
Interesting. Brian, let me ask you. John made reference to Edgewater West. Anybody who lives in Edgewater, and I used to live there. Mr. Fackler used to live there as well. Edgewater West between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. and between 2:30 and 6:30, you weren't moving. I mean, the cars were basically. So, I mean, what kind of quality of life do you see here? And is this maybe a push towards urban type of lifestyle where it's more of a walking? What do you make of that, Brian?
Well, the challenge is Windwood was not designed for the density of Edgewater. The streets were not designed for that. As you mentioned, 95 is kind of blocking you from going west, and the railroad tracks are blocking you from going east. So there's only a few intersections you can go on to do that. And so if there's that much more density, it creates some challenges. Everyone is trying to squeeze through those intersections unless you happen to work there. And there's not really a good public transit for all those people to take. So again, it's not designed for that type of density. That the city worked very hard on a specific plan and a specific type of density that matched what the neighborhood was designed for. And even then, people were like, "Oh, 12 stories is a big change for Windwood. We're used to 1 and 2 story warehouses with graffiti, and 12 stories that's a lot. That's a lot. 12 is a lot." And now it's like, well, 48. Oh, well, 48 is really a lot, But my concern is what brought people to Windwood in the first place is changing. People came to Windwood because it was cool you could walk around and see awesome murals on the sides of warehouses. There were cool places to get coffee, like Panther Coffee and Zach the Baker. There were artist studios. There were a lot of kind of cool local things to visit. And some of those local places are leaving now. Some of them are getting priced out. The artist studios are getting priced out. A lot of the warehouses are being redeveloped, and so, so at the end of the day, when you talked about come here, live here, work here, when it's just Edgewater West, does it have the same appeal that it had before? Because once you get rid of what made it cool,
Exactly.
it's just another place with 48-story buildings in Miami, but it's not closer to the bay like Edgewater. It's not near the arena like downtown. It doesn't have shops like Brickell and the financial district like Brickell. It doesn't have that. And once you take away the coolness factor of the warehouses and the art and the local vendors, what is it?
Brian nailed it. It's another great Miami plan gone sideways.
Mr. Fackler,
But not necessarily because of Miami. They didn't expect the Live Local Act to come in there and do that. But
yeah,
you're going to see a lot of neighborhoods around the state, that have that happen.
Mr. Fackler, if I can ask you, you lived up in New York in the 80s when the changes were going on up there. But what I want to ask you, one of the things that made Windwood interesting is it was cheap. Let's not mess around. People went to the Wood Tavern because it was cheap. You could drink cheap booze. You could drink. It wasn't necessarily good quality. You could drink cheap. That's why people went there. Windwood Brewery was one of the first breweries to open up in that general area when the state finally started to open up some of the alcohol licenses. So, and why'd you go there? Because it was cheap. You could sort of pick this stuff up. Now to go out in Windwood, Mr. Fackler, we're talking about Michelin-starred restaurant. As the cheap has disappeared, do we lose the artist? Do we lose everything like Brian? That was really the magnet, and can you compare or contrast maybe what you saw in New York in the 80s?
I think it's a great point because understand the attraction for New Yorkers were the galleries. The Steve Rebell, as we know from Studio 54, he had there was a lot of draws for New York artistic types, culturally as well. So, I remember coming down and visiting in the late 80s. There was a place called Fire and Ice. We did the disco dancing and the whole bit. It was like,
can you do that again?
I don't think so. I look like Trump.
That.
But I mean, seriously, I mean, it was a draw. I mean, I had friends who would come down and party in that part of Miami, the design district, actually, which is very close to obviously Windwood. So, that was a big draw. I mean, initially, especially in the late 80s. It's been going on for a while, and that's why it was a cool factor, like Brian says.
Yeah, but that's all part of the evolution of a neighborhood. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not static. You can't regulate,
That's true.
the coolness,
Yeah.
That's a great point. And I'll just wrap up the conversation with, back in the day, there was a concept they called the FTAA to try to bring free trade to all of the countries in the Americas. And there was a ministerial meeting that was being held in Miami, and there was an anarchist group that was coming down to protest against. And actually, right there in Windwood, was right on Miami Avenue, where a building called Synergy is located. That was the actual physical location where all the anarchists hung out. So if anyone wants to know what this area used to be, read a Miami Need Times the piece. I think Jim DeFeedy wrote it back in the day, talking about the anarchists who were hanging out there because the police weren't going to be able to get in. They can kind of be underground, stuff like that. There has definitely come a long way in the course of 25 years or so. Let's go to Brian Bandell with story number 5. Brian, the piece you wrote, it appeared in the South Florida Business Journal. I'm going to read the headline for a couple graphs, and I want you to provide insight. You wrote it, might not want to comment, but maybe you can just give us some insight for the audience. Here we go with the headline. Waldorf Astoria Tower in Miami nabs record $658 million construction loan. Subhead, Florida's future tallest building just secured the highest construction loan. And in the first couple graphs, Brian, the developers of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and Residence Miami obtained a $668 million construction loan, the largest ever for a condo project in Florida. That's another record for this downtown Miami skyscraper, which will be the tallest building in Florida at 1,049 feet when it's completed. Arkansas-based bank OZK and New York-based Related Fund Management, part of the Related Companies real estate empire of billionaire Stephen M. Ross, provided the mortgage to Miami-based Property Markets Group, known as PMG, as well as Canada-based Gradebrook, Cyprus-based Mohari Hospitality, and Aventura-based S2 Development. It covers a mixed-use project at 300 Biscayne Boulevard. Brian, why don't you give us some more insight about this? Basically, it's going on Biscayne Boulevard, right across from the Bayside Marketplace, not far from where the Port of Miami is, as well as not far from the Kaseya Center, where the Miami Heat plays, just to give people some context. So, Brian, why don't you share some insight with us if you could?
Yes, this has a very unique design. If you could check out the story, you'll see it's like kind of boxed, stacked on top of each other, each rotated a little bit, kind of staggered. So it's very, very cool look. Obviously not cheap to build like that, as you can tell by the loan amount. But yeah, it has 387 condos, 205 hotel rooms. Hilton will manage the hotel rooms, but the developer will still own them. So now you might think, oh my God, that loan is huge. How can you get a loan like that? Well, it really comes down to how successful you were in pre-sales, right? The bank's going to say, how much money do you have in pre-sales? Well, according to Ryan Shear from PMG, more than 90% of the condos are pre-sold. He said that the value of amount of sales, assuming all that closes, is $950 million. Wow. So that's way more than the loan amount. So the banks calculate this by the amount of pre-sales you have in dollar versus the amount of the loan. And so if you're like, almost $300 million above the pre-sales in the loan amount, you're like, okay, we feel that we're pretty good here in terms of that. And you still have some room to go in pre-sale too, plus the value of the hotel is an additional amount of money. So that's why the bank felt that they could make this loan at this time, and why the developer was feeling pretty good about it. And included in those pre-sales, I mean, they could break the record for the most expensive condo ever in Miami. Here they have some pretty pricey units under contract here. I think the 130,000 square foot penthouse is under contract for $90 million, according to Ryan Shear. So that would break the record and then some when that closes in, maybe 4 years or so.
Wow. But Brian, I don't know if you can answer the question, but I'm just going to sort of throw it out, maybe share some insight. So according to your piece, there's 387 condos and there's 205 hotel units.
Yeah.
or keys, if you will, the key to the
Yeah.
door. So the construction loan, is it for all of for the hotel and the condo, or just the condo? Did they give you any clarification, or is it
No,
kind of
it's for
vague?
the whole thing. It's for the hotel, the condo, the parking garage, the retail at the ground floor, the amenities. Well, the whole thing. It's covering the whole thing basically. So that's why you could also take the value of the hotel as an operating business and also, hold that in addition to the pre-sale. The hotel will have value when it's completed.
Interesting. Okay, so I can't really add the condos and the hotels together and come up with 592 and then divide it by the construction loan, which is 668, and come out to about $1.1 million a door. That wouldn't be right to sort of get a ballpark then, correct?
Well, not for the loan. You could take the amount of pre-sale, that 950, and divide it by, let's see. They sold 90% of the condos, right? So you could take, the number of condos, 387 times 90, and then you could you get that number of how much they sold, then 950 million divided by that number, and that's probably about the average of what they're selling for. I know that when they launched sales in 2021, it started about $1 million. Obviously, the remaining, he said that from the remaining inventory is priced between $4 million and $30 million. Now, obviously, there's a wide range because you have starting at $1 million, then you have a $90 million penthouse. So the $90 million penthouse goes 90 units at $1 million.
Absolutely. Mr. Griff, let me ask you a question. So PMG is putting this up. The project's going up ballpark like 2nd Street in Biscayne. A couple blocks to the north, there's a building called the Elster, which was also built by PMG. Used to be a church there, so they bought the church. They actually built a little chapel. If you ever go into the Elster, which is a kind of hotel, well, it's got some rental component, short-term rental component. But I was recently looking at the Elster. They still got 15% of their developer units still in the name of the developer. I don't know if that's intentional, unintentional. But I guess what I'm wondering, Mr. Gruss, is we got all these units going up within 3, 4, 5 blocks of each other. At what point do we hit a tipping point where it's kind of overkill, or is a product, because this is a Waldorf Astoria versus an Elster, which I'm not sure if anybody knows, where they sort of separated. So what's kind of your take on that, Mr. Gruss? Too much product, or is the product different enough where they both can kind of work?
Florida's boom and bust. There's always too much in a boom. It's always too much. I mean, we're seeing it now. I mean, it's just the number of buildings that are proposed and going up. All kinds of branded towers with the seemingly tapping into a seemingly endless, bottomless market of multi-million-dollar buyers. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. The other interesting thing to me is this bank, Bank OZK, has become sort of a major player in South Florida. It used to be called Bank of the Ozarks, and I've covered banking in Florida long enough to know that we've seen the cycles of out-of-state banks coming into Florida. There were Alabama banks, there were Tennessee banks, Carolina banks, banks out of the Midwest coming to Florida, and they, for the most part, things didn't really end well for them. And I have to say, like, their exposure to South Florida is pretty significant. And I mean, hats off to them for scoring these deals, these loans. But I mean, that's a lot of cash. That's a lot of capital tie up in a geographical area in a state that's traditionally boom and bust.
Mr. Factor, this is season 5 of our podcast. We began this podcast during the pandemic, and one of the stories we discussed early on in season 1 or 2, when it was audio only, was this idea that they were going to put up a condo that was named after a cabaret, don't call it a titty bar, called 11. And PMG is also involved with 11. They got 2 towers going up there. So we got 11, which is the cabaret, don't call it a strip joint, condo with the hotel. We got the Elster, which was built as a rental and they converted into condos and the short-term rentals. And now we got the Waldorf Astoria, all done by one developer within a short distance. effectively 10 blocks north to south or so. So, Mr. Becker, can you sort of discuss sort of like the different demographic or the buying type in that community, keeping in mind that one of our loyal listeners actually had a bet with you about whether or not
Yes.
11 would be successful or unsuccessful. So why don't you take over, Mr.
Well,
Beckler?
It's a well-known fact that my predictions are often wrong, flat out.
He's
So
a Jets fan, so
Yeah, I'm a Jets fan, so there you go. It just comes with the territory. But yeah, I remember that incident, and apparently I was wrong. I mean, it's very successful development. I don't know, what the long-term viability is of it, but it's one of these unique type developments. You got a cabaret that's attached to it. There's a certain type of, let's say, a Las Vegas type, gambler type who might be the ones that are interested in this. But again, they're high end. They've got the money. So why not spend it? So I'm not going to ever say anything negative until I see it happen.
I just want to say last year I interviewed Mark Robert, who's one of the partners of 11, and I actually took the virtual 3D tour of their 11 combat project, and it's very cool. It looks awesome what they're planning to do there, and it definitely looks like a fun atmosphere. And I think that's what they're
Exactly.
it's a different clientele than Word Up Astoria. It's definitely like a fun, hipper clientele, and I think they hit that niche pretty well.
Exactly. It's unique.
It's unique. And I would remind the audience member, Mr. Fackler owes you a lunch, so please feel free to reach out. You can get him on at JT Fackler, JTFAKLER. So let's go on with story number 6. John Fackler, we're going to go to you with story number 6. It's coming out of WPLG, localpen.com, with the ABC affiliate down here in Miami. I'm going to read you the headline, first couple graphs, and I want you to comment. You're the gentleman we go to regularly when it comes to condo association tips, if you will, any issues related to condo association, some of the arrests, some of the alleged assault, some of that type of stuff. So it's kind of right up your alley, Mr. Fackler. Headline: Aventura man accused of stalking former condo board opponent and brandishing weapons. And here we go, Mr. Fackler. First couple graphs, and I want you to comment. An Aventura man is facing 2 criminal charges after police accused him of stalking a former condominium board opponent and brandishing weapons amid a month-long dispute. Moises Mitrani, 73, is facing charges of stalking and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon following his arrest on Tuesday. Story goes on to say, according to the arrest report, Mitrani had been running against the victim for director on the board at the Harborside condominium at 3640 Yacht Club Drive. Police said he eventually dropped out of the race and the victim won the re-election. Police said between March 5th and May 26th, Mitrani left 10 threatening voicemails, sent roughly 500 text messages, made 40 to 50 calls to the victim's cell phone, despite pleas for him to stop. Mr. Fackler, why don't you go ahead and finish up some of the details of the story and then give us your take. Are we seeing more of these, or the media simply just covering it because of everything going on with condo association in this looming 2025 condo association financial clip where special assessments and maintenance fees are going up tremendously for a lot of condo owners?
I'm wondering how much COVID has contributed to the anger and violence out in the street when it comes to these condo boards. This guy we talked about before, several months ago, he brandished a gun, slapped it on the desk. He had the shit out of the security woman and demanded to talk to this guy that he ran against. Okay. Fast forward to this. He runs against the guy. Guy wins. Or basically, they said he backed out. Yep. So this is really a revenge play. Several months later, he goes after him again. This time he slaps a knife on the desk. And the security officer, calls the cops, and he's arrested. And this guy is legitimately out of his mind, allegedly. Let me just foreshadow this by saying everything here is allegations. Now, what I don't understand, okay, the judge in this case, okay, decided to turn the stalking charge into a misdemeanor and drop one of the assault charges. And gave him a $3,500 bond. $3,500 bond is nothing. The guy should be in jail, but in my opinion. But obviously he must have made the bond and he's out in the street. So this poor guy, and he ran again, has got to be tripping. I mean, he's like, oh my God, this guy is out on the street. He's going to come after me again. Definitely serves watching, because we'll see how this plays out. If this guy is going to just stop stalking this guy and harassing him. So
I wonder
it's
if he
really
got a
interesting.
restraining order, though. I mean, you could try and do that.
Well, that's a good point. And but I according to the story, I didn't see anything about a restraining order. So I think that might be the next step. As far as these people go. But I mean, it's just ironic that we just talked about this guy just a couple of months ago. We were talking about this, and it's a repeat performance. And I just look at what he did. I mean, it's once again, there's no price to pay for violence in Miami.
And Mr. Fackler, why do you think this is going on? Or is it going on just as much as it always, but now suddenly it's getting covered a lot more?
Well, it's getting covered a lot more. We talked about that too before, because let's face it, I mean, this is getting covered more. I think this went under the radar because the enforcement lacking. So there's nobody to enforce these issues. There's bigger fish to fry, so to speak, and something like this gets lost. But I think now that it's being covered more in the media, you're going to see a lot more. You're going to see a lot more issues faced by these characters. So,
Jean or Brian, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, recently signed a condominium law that basically it's moving towards bringing some transparency to condo associations, especially in terms of sharing records with members or owners of units within a particular association. It doesn't share it with the general public, but it shares it within members. And there's now some criminal charges for association board members as well as professional people who might not necessarily be adhering to everything. Do you guys think maybe bringing some clarity, bringing some sort of sunshine to the condo associations and the way they operate and why everybody can hit with special assessment as well as higher maintenance fees? Do you think that might lessen the anxiety, the aggression, or do you think people just simply don't like each other in condominium, and no matter what you do, you're still going to have these situations?
Well, HOA boards have always been notorious for big fights and brawls and stuff like that. But I think the financial strain now that's coming down the road with special assessments and higher costs for insurance and common area maintenance and things like that is really it's really putting a lot of people under pressure, and there's just a lot more animosity. I think a greater transparency and accountability is a good thing. The problem is that these boards have been been operating like little small time criminal organizations, and sort of running their little condo communities like sort of the crime families might run an organization, and now everybody's got to pay up, and that's causing a lot of angst and strain, and I think people are taking it out on each other, and it's a consequence of that, and I think obviously rightly so, the press is taking note of it because that's what's happening. It's this is a hot issue right now.
There's going to be a lot of frustrated people at the board members if they're getting charged higher fees and special assessments, but a lot of it's going to be based on the law. But, you can't take it out on the lawmakers. You take it out on who's in front of you, which is the board members. So they need some extra security at those board meetings.
I want to thank everybody for participating in this podcast. Let me go ahead and thank Jean Groos. He was a reporter for 25 years. And right now he does public relations marketing. He has a firm called Groos Communications. Check out his website, GroosPR.com, GRUSSPR.com. You can get him on X, which is at Jean Groos, JeanGrus. I want to thank John Fackler. John was a journalist for over 20 years. Right now he does public relations marketing. He's also launched a newsletter and podcast called Jet Up Miami, and it's on Substack, JETUP Miami on Substack. And if you want to get a hold of him on X, especially if you're the gentleman who made him the bet a few years back about the 11 condo project, and you made a bet about lunch, he's ready to pay up. You can get him on X at JT Fackler, JTFAKLER. And let's thank Brian Bandell. Brian is a veteran journalist, been a journalist for 25 years or so. He's also an author. He works over at the South Florida Business Journal. If you want to get a hold of Brian, get him on X at Brian Bandell, BrianBandell. And I'm Peter Zalewski of Condom Vultures. Thank you for tuning in. You got any comments for us? Do you have any questions? Get us on X at Miami RRP, which stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. Not AARP, but Miami RRP. And then finally, don't forget to check out my website. We're the sponsor of the podcast, condovultures.com. Anything related to condos in South Florida, you'll be able to get it there. So until next time, I hope everybody takes care of themselves, and we'll catch up real soon. Ciao, ciao. This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures Podcast. If you have a property that you're looking to sell in the Tri-County, South Florida area, I would encourage you to reach out to Jenny Cortez, a licensed real estate broker with CVRrealty.com. She's my partner. She's been in the business for north of 15 years. More importantly, she knows the market. She knows how to get that deal done. And she also realizes that it's more important to get a price that you can accept and sell the property rather than to hold firm on some price that's never going to be achieved and ultimately languish on the market. So if you're looking to do a deal that you want a skilled expert who can help you sell a property, reach out to Jenny Cortez at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859, or visit her website, CVRrealty.com. This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures Podcast. Before I started doing these podcasts, I was in the business of being a licensed real estate broker, a contributing columnist for the Miami Herald, as well as the Miami Real Deal, but also extra witness work and consulting. So if you are looking for an expert witness, or if you're looking for consulting services, a straight talk perspective as to what's going on in a particular marketplace, a building, or what happened previously, for whatever your situation is, whether you are an attorney, whether you are an institutional fund looking to invest, or whether you're a lender who's trying to come up with some sort of strategy and approach for your lending committee going forward, I just might be able to help you. To get a hold of me, please reach out to Peter at condovultures.com. That's Peter at condovultures.com. Or give me a call to the office at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859.